Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join this webinar. My name is Toby Thorne. I'm a Senior Manager in the tax team at James Cooper Creston, and I specialise in VAT. The purpose of this webinar is to answer some of the common questions we get asked by equestrian businesses regarding VAT on livery and riding school activities, and also to highlight some of the key areas where the VAT position is not straightforward and we often see mistakes. So I'm going to be talking for around 20 minutes this morning, maybe a bit longer, depending on whether we have any questions. And I'm confident that by the end of this webinar, you will have a better understanding of not only the VAT treatment of these activities, and will therefore be in a much better position to correctly account for the VAT going forward, but also the scenarios where the VAT position is not clear, and you should be cautious, and most likely look to seek advice to get clarity. So here is a quick overview of what I'll be covering today. So basic livery, livery by specialist yards and riding schools. There will then be an opportunity for questions. So please feel free to send in questions you still have at this point using the Q&A tab. If there are any questions that I don't get around to answering today for any reason, I will pick these up with you directly offline. Or if you think of a question once we have finished today, then please feel free to get in touch with me directly, and my contact details will be shown at the end of the webinar. Then finally, I will end with a summary of the key points and takeaways from what we've discussed. So moving on to the first topic then, I mentioned at the beginning, the purpose being that we will be answering some of the common questions we get asked. And the first of these is livery VAT exempt? We get asked this question a lot, and as is usually the way in tax, the answer is it depends. To answer this question, we need to determine whether the services being provided are basic livery or livery by a specialist yard, and the VAT treatment for each of these is different. So starting with the basic livery, which typically includes stabling, mucking out, feeding, grazing, grooming, health checks. The default position is that the whole package is VAT exempt. This is because the predominant element of the package is the stabling, which is a land-related activity. And the default position for a right over land, even without a formal lease or license to occupy, is that it is VAT exempt. This is on the basis, however, that the horse is stabled in the same place and not moved from yard to yard. And it is the whole package that is VAT exempt because it is seen as a single supply for VAT purposes, not a mixed or multiple supply where you have to apportion values between each benefit of the package. And this is because other than the stabling, or the services other than the stabling, such as the grooming, the feeding, the mucking out, etc., only take place because the horse is stabled. So the stabling is the key element of the package. Without the stabling, the other elements simply wouldn't exist. So the default position is that the whole livery package is VAT exempt. An important point to note is that exempt income does not count towards the VAT registration threshold. So for a business that only has basic livery income, even if their turnover was to exceed £85,000 in a 12-month period, they would not be required to register for VAT. So one caveat to all of what I've mentioned so far is that you can elect to waive the exemption on land, also referred to as an option to tax, which makes any supply of the land subject to VAT at the standard rate, meaning the whole livery package would go from being VAT exempt to being VAT standard rated. Now, on this point, firstly, the business would need to be VAT registered in order to opt to tax. So any of you who are not VAT registered, this won't apply. And secondly, opting to tax is actually quite uncommon in these situations, given basic livery is typically being provided to private individuals. So by opting to tax, you would now need to charge VAT on the livery package, which is ultimately going to put your price up by 20%, as these private individuals will not be in a position to recover the VAT charge from HMRC. Furthermore, there is unlikely to be many ongoing costs incurred by the livery business that attract VAT, so minimal VAT will be able to be recovered from HMRC on the other side. So unless perhaps there was significant repairs which attracted VAT, that's probably the only point where a decision needs to be made. I would recommend that you seek advice to discuss your options and find out which is the best route forward with regards to VAT in this situation. So opting to tax is an option available to livery businesses. However, it is unlikely to be beneficial. Therefore, it remains that most basic livery packages being provided are VAT exempt. The final point I'll make on this topic is regarding grazing. If you are VAT registered, you can isolate the grazing element of the package separately on your sales invoice. And this is a zero rate supply of animal feed. This is a good outcome because it has no VAT added, but is a taxable sale, and so improves the VAT recovery on your overhead costs via your partial exemption calculation. If you're VAT registered and make both taxable and exempt supplies, partial exemption should be something that you're familiar with. If, however, your livery business is not VAT registered, then there's no need to apportion. So that was basic livery packages, and I'll now move on to livery being provided by specialist yards, which I mentioned earlier has a different VAT treatment. So for specialist yards, such as racehorse trainers, stud farms, or stables involved with schooling horses or breaking them in, the whole livery package becomes VAT standard rated, regardless of whether an options tax is in place or not. And this is because the stabling is no longer the predominant part of the package and is therefore not a lamb-related activity. So the whole package becomes VAT standard rated. This income is therefore taxable, and if you are not already VAT registered, this income does count towards the VAT registration threshold, and if exceeded, you will be required to register for VAT. This is, however, unlikely to be problematic and, if anything, beneficial, given you are a special purpose yard. So your clients are likely to be business customers who are also registered for VAT. So any VAT you charge onto them, they will be able to recover from HMRC via their VAT return. You will then also be able to recover any VAT incurred on cost running the yard via your own VAT return. So if the amount of VAT being claimed from HMRC outweighs the cost and admin burden of preparing and submitting VAT returns, you will actually be better off from being VAT registered. So if you are one of these specialist yards and you are not VAT registered, then you should look into the possibility of voluntarily registering for VAT. And if you are not sure if it is right for your business, then please get in touch and we can discuss the options available to you. So this brings me on to the final topic and the remaining common question that we get asked, which is, are riding lessons VAT exempt? The answer is, you guessed it, it depends. To answer this question, we need to find out what type of entity the business is and who is physically delivering the lessons, as these will determine the VAT treatment. And by asking these questions, what we are ultimately trying to determine is whether the VAT educational exemption applies. So horse riding training, including pony clubs, is a subject that HMRC accepts is education. being a subject ordinarily taught in schools. So to be VAT exempt, one of the following conditions needs to be met. Firstly, the provider is a not-for-profit, so has no ability to distribute their profits. And I will just note that merely making losses does not meet this criteria. Or secondly, the tuition is delivered by a sole prop or a partner. So if the business is a sole proprietor or a partnership, the training must be physically delivered by that sole prop or a partner of the partnership. If it's delivered by an employee or an external contractor, the VAT exemption does not apply. It follows, therefore, that there will be occasions when a small training yard, say, the owner delivers 50% of the sessions and an employee delivers the other 50%. So two different VAT rates, one VAT exempt, one VAT standard rated. For businesses not currently VAT registered, the exempt income does not count towards the threshold, but the other taxable income does count towards the threshold. So using this example, and let's assume the business has no other taxable income, it would only need to track the income from the lessons delivered by employees. If this portion of the income remains under the VAT turnover threshold, then they do not need to register for VAT. Another common situation we see is that riding school businesses have incorporated and are a normal limited company that distributes its profits. Unfortunately, neither of the necessary conditions are met in this scenario, and therefore the VAT exemption does not apply. So the riding school income is VAT standard rated, or if they're not VAT registered, it counts towards the VAT turnover threshold. There is no distinction for VAT between the type of tuition, so whether it's for young children or adults, or whether it leads to a BHS exam, or whether it's jumping or dressage, they are all treated the same for VAT purposes. There are some other possible income streams for these businesses, being entry fees for competitions perhaps, say like a locally organised competition for dressage or show jumping. So these entry fees will not be subject to VAT, so long as the fees are used exclusively for prize monies, which is typically the case. Summer schools for children, perhaps. This is if the primary purpose of the event is training, it follows the VAT treatment that I've already explained previously. And then finally, children's birthday parties, perhaps. This one is likely not to be education, so VAT standard rated, including any other catering or any other services that are provided. And then finally, on this topic, we'll just cover the hiring of facilities by third party. So this is not uncommon. It could either be a tutor hiring the yard for their own activities, or you could own the yard and are renting out the space to a private individual for them to use, or it could be for non-equestrian activities such as dog agility, for example. Firstly, we need to consider whether it's a right of the land, which, as we know, has a default position of being VAT exempt, or is VAT standard rated if an options tax is in place? Or do the additional specialist facilities, such as a covered area, fences, special floor, tack room, heating, sets of jumps, dressage boards, etc., any of which could make it more than a right over land and therefore VAT standard rated, even without an options tax being in place? This is certainly one of those situations where the VAT position is not straightforward, and you should be cautious, judging each case on its own merits to determine whether the land is the predominant supply. If this is relevant to you, or you think it might be in the future, and you are unsure of the VAT treatment, please do get in touch and we can discuss it to make sure that you account for the VAT correctly. So that is all of the topics that I'm going to be covering today in any great detail. There is now an opportunity to ask some questions. So if you've not already done so, please do send your questions in and I will try and work through them. But if not, I'll move on to the summary. But I'll give it a few moments just in case there are any questions. So you can't speak, but if you just type your question into the Q&A box. So there is one here that's come through as a proprietor of a limited company, if I teach lessons are subject to VAT. So what I think they're trying to say is that they are a director of a limited company and that they teach riding school lessons. So unfortunately, the education exemption is not going to apply in that scenario. So if that company is registered for VAT, then yes, they are, those lessons will be VAT standard rated. There's another question here about partial exemption, which is quite specific. So if you don't mind, Chrissy, I'll pick that one up offline. So there's one that's come in here. So we are a livery yard providing mainly stable with the option to add on livery services, turnout, etc. So that there is basic livery. So it's the stabling is still the main element there, even if they add on some other livery services such as turnout. The main element of that supply is still the stabling. So provided you do not have an options tax in place, it will be VAT exempt. So then there's another question here. So with grass livery, if services are being supplied, checks, feeding, adjusting, rugs, is it now VATable? So maybe you can pick that one up, like, but it's unclear whether there's stabling. If there is a stabling element to that livery, even if there's then grazing, feed, checking provided with it, the main element is still going to be the stabling. So again, provided there is not an options tax in place on those stables, it is going to be VAT exempt. And someone's just asked about that they missed the start of the webinar. So yes, there will be a recording of this and it will be going out on our website. So if you've missed anything at the start, don't worry, it'll be recorded and it'll be available to watch. I think there are some more questions, but they're getting a bit specific. So what I will do is I will pick these up offline and I'll get in touch in the next couple of days. So thank you for all your questions. I will now move on to the summary. So as I mentioned earlier, if there's anything you think of going forward, please do get in touch with me directly. My contact details will be shown at the end. So to finish off this morning, as I mentioned, I was just going to repeat through some of the key points for each of the topics that I've covered today. And the first one being basic livery. And so one is the default position is that it's VAT exempt. 2 is that this income does not count towards the VAT turnover threshold. And then lastly, it is possible to opt to tax, but it's unlikely to be beneficial. So next was the specialist yards. So VAT standard rated. This income does count towards the VAT threshold. VAT registration is likely to be beneficial. So if not already registered for VAT, you should consider voluntarily registering. But if you're not sure, please get in touch. And then finally, riding schools. So VAT exempt if the business is a not-for-profit or the lessons are delivered by a sole prop or a partner of a partnership. In all other circumstances, these are VAT standard rated. And then on the hire of facilities by a third party, be cautious, judge each case on its own merits to determine if the land is the predominant supply. And if you're not sure, seek advice. And that's it for this webinar on livery and riding schools. But before I finish, I would quickly mention some of the other equestrian topics that we are regularly advising on, being racing activities, breeding and stud farm activities, and the movement of horses in and out of the UK. So we will look to do another webinar covering these topics in the near future. So keep an eye out for this if you think that will be relevant for you. If you have any questions about the topics that I've covered today or anything VAT related for that matter, please do not hesitate to get in touch. My contact details are on screen now. Thank you all for listening. As I said, I'll get in touch with those guys that I didn't get around to answering your questions. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.